Welcome back to the Living Current. So, in the previous episodes, we've been gradually building a picture of reality that is very different from the one many of us grew up with. We've explored the idea that beneath the apparent solidity of the world, there is movement. Everything is in relationship with everything else. Energy flows, information flows, consciousness flows. Nothing exists in complete isolation because everything is part of a much larger process. Now, today, I want to take that one step further by talking about fate. So, fate is one of those words that immediately creates tension because most people imagine one of two extremes, usually. Either they think fate means that every moment of our lives has already been predetermined, as though we're simply actors reading from a script that was written long before we arrived. Or they reject the idea entirely and say that everything is random, that life is nothing more than chance events colliding with one another. I don't think either of those views really reflects the world we experience. Instead, I'd like to suggest another way of thinking about fate. Rather than seeing it as a fixed destination, imagine it as a landscape of possibilities. Some paths are more likely than others. Some possibilities gather momentum, while others gradually fade away. Every choice we make, every relationship we build, every habit we reinforce, and every experience we have subtly changes the probabilities of what comes next. And this is where I think the living current becomes such a useful model. But before we dive into that, I want to quickly thank Rev Kai for supporting this channel and today's video, which is sponsored by them. Now, Rev Kai is a specialized astrologer and diviner with over 25 years of experience. They provide a strategic blueprint for your life using little-known medieval and Renaissance astrological methods gleaned from recently discovered manuscripts. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, Rev Kai offers regular forecasting for the month or year ahead, so you always know exactly what's coming. They even specialize in deep dive services like identifying your innate magical skills and uncovering the name of your natal genius. For major events like business launches or weddings, they use electional astrology to find your window for success. And if you've never known your birth time, Rev Kai's rectification service can find it for you, giving you an accurate map to work with. They also help people build sustainable connections through ancestral veneration and spirit communication, sorting through lineage and tradition with confidence. Now, Rev Kai is offering a special 20% off for my viewers, so visit revkai.com and use the secret password Midnight Hair, which you'll see on the screen and it's in the description below. Use that when you book your initial consultation. So stop guessing and start navigating with precision. So imagine standing beside a wide river. Okay, you don't control the river. You can't order it to reverse direction or stop flowing simply because you've decided it should. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. You can remove an obstruction. You can place stones that redirect part of the flow. You can dig a small channel that encourages the water to move in a slightly different direction. None of these actions dominate the river, but each one influences how the water behaves. And to me, that is a much better image for magic than the popular idea of commanding the universe to obey our wishes. Magic is less about overpowering reality and more about learning how to work with its natural movement. It is the art of understanding currents that already exist and gently encouraging them in a particular direction. And that may sound less dramatic than the fantasy version of magic, but I actually think it's far more profound. It places us inside nature rather than outside it. We become participants in the unfolding of reality instead of attempting to stand above it. And this way of looking at things also changes how we think about magical results. And one of the most common mistakes beginners make is expecting every successful working to produce an immediate and spectacular outcome. They imagine that a prosperity ritual should be followed by money appearing from nowhere, just poof out of thin air, or that a love spell should instantly transform another person's feelings overnight. Sometimes life does surprise us with extraordinary events, but much more often change unfolds through a chain of ordinary moments that only reveal their significance in hindsight. Perhaps you perform a ritual seeking a new career. A week later, you happen to attend an event you almost decided to skip. There, you meet someone who mentions an opportunity that wasn't even on your radar. That opportunity leads to another conversation, then another. And 6 months later, you find yourself doing work that has completely changed your life. Which moment was the spell? Was it the ritual itself? Was it the conversation? Was it the decision to attend the event? Or was it the entire sequence of events taken together? I think magic often works in sequences rather than spectacles. It nudges one event which influences another and another after that until eventually an entirely different future begins to emerge. One of the reasons this idea makes sense to me is because nature itself behaves this way. We often hear people refer to the butterfly effect, the idea that the flap of a butterfly's wings could eventually contribute to enormous changes elsewhere in the world. Whether that example is literally true isn't really the point. The point is that complex systems can be extraordinarily sensitive to small influences. We see this everywhere. Weather systems evolve from countless tiny interactions. Economies can be affected by seemingly significant decisions that ripple through entire markets. Ecosystems depend upon delicate balances between species. Human societies are shaped by conversations, ideas, and inventions that often begin with just one person. Chaos theory doesn't tell us that everything is random, quite the opposite. It tells us that complex systems are governed by rules, but because so many variables interact with one another, long term outcomes become incredibly difficult to predict. Small differences at the beginning of a process can eventually produce enormous differences further down the line. That should sound familiar to anyone practicing magic. If reality is already an intricate web of interacting influences, then perhaps magical work doesn't need to violate natural law at all. Perhaps it simply introduces one more meaningful influence into an already evolving system. This also helps explain why experienced practitioners often speak less about certainty and more about probability. Notice that language carefully. Probability, not certainty. Magic Magic doesn't guarantee outcomes in the way that flipping a light switch guarantees illumination. Instead, it shifts conditions. It changes momentum. It strengthens something or some possibilities while weakening others. You might think of it as increasing the likelihood that certain paths become the ones reality chooses to follow. For me, this is a much healthier way of understanding magical influences because it keeps us grounded. It reminds us that we are participating in an unimaginably vast universe containing countless other wills, circumstances, and natural processes. Our own influence is real, but it exists alongside many other influences. Rather than diminishing magic, I actually think this makes it more elegant. Consider the work of a skilled sailor. They cannot command the wind, they cannot stop the tides or rearrange the weather, yet through knowledge and experience, they can travel remarkable distances by understanding how these forces behave. They learn when to raise the sails, when to wait, when to change direction, when to allow the current itself to carry them forward. The sea remains free, but the sailor still exercises genuine influence over their journey. The magician, I think, learns something very similar. Instead of asking, how can I force reality to obey me, they begin asking, where is reality already moving and how can I work with that movement? And that question alone changes the entire philosophy of magical practice. It also changes how we understand intention. Modern discussions of manifestation often reduce intention to little more than wanting something hard enough. But intention is much more sophisticated than desire. Desire simply says, I want. Intention says, this is the direction I choose to move. Those are the same thing. We've all wanted things that, in hindsight, would have been terrible for us. Desire is often impulsive, emotional, and reactive. Intention is reflective. It aligns our thoughts, our emotions, our actions, and our symbolic work towards a shared direction. That is one of the hidden functions of ritual. People often ask why ritual matters if intention is what's really important. Why bother with candles, incense, planetary hours, sacred symbols, or carefully constructed ceremonies? Now, apart from the fact that intention is not everything, the answer is that ritual is not for the universe. It is for you, for us. Human beings are symbolic creatures. We think through symbols, stories, and metaphors. Rituals gather together our imagination, our emotions, our memories, our attention, and our physical actions into a single coherent experience. Instead of our minds being pulled in 10 different directions, ritual briefly allows every part of ourselves to move together, and that coherence matters. Think about how much of everyday life is fragmented. One part of us wants success, while another part fears responsibility. One part longs for intimacy, while another fears rejection. We say we want transformation, but we cling to familiar habits because they feel safe. Ritual doesn't magically erase those inner contradictions, but it creates a space where they can begin moving in the same direction. It allows our internal currents to become more aligned, and that alignment itself has power. This brings us naturally to synchronicity. Now, Carl Jung described synchronicity as meaningful coincidence. These are moments when events appear connected not through obvious physical cause and effect, but through shared meaning. Most people who have practiced magic for any length of time accumulate stories like this. You perform a ritual seeking guidance, and the next morning, a friend unexpectedly recommends exactly the book you needed. You may spend weeks wrestling with a difficult decision, and suddenly the same message appears in conversations, dreams, and seemingly unrelated experiences. You think of someone you haven't spoken to in years, and they contact you later that day. Of course, skeptics will say these are merely coincidences, and We should acknowledge that coincidence is certainly part of life. Human beings are excellent pattern recognition machines, and we are perfectly capable of seeing significance where none objectively exists. Discernment remains essential. But I also think it's worth asking whether meaning itself might play a more active role in reality than our materialist worldview usually allows. After all, symbols change behavior. Behavior changes decisions. Decisions change relationships. Relationships change opportunities. Opportunities change lives. Meaning has consequences. Whether we describe that process psychologically, spiritually, or magically almost becomes secondary. The current flows through all of those layers simultaneously. I sometimes think one of the greatest gifts of magical practice is that it teaches us to become attentive. After performing a ritual, many people sit back waiting for fireworks. They expect reality to announce itself with dramatic certainty. Instead, the current often whispers. It appears as an unexpected invitation, a passing comment, a dream that refuses to be forgotten, a strange coincidence that keeps repeating, or an intuition that quietly insists on being followed. The question is whether you're paying attention. Magic doesn't simply alter the world around us, it alters the way we engage with the world. It sharpens awareness. It teaches us to notice opportunities that our distracted minds might otherwise overlook. And some critics dismiss this by saying, well, you've simply changed your perception. Yes, exactly. Perception changes behavior, behavior changes outcomes. If a ritual leaves you more confident, more observant, more emotionally balanced, and more willing to recognize opportunity, then your future has already become different. The distinction between psychological and magical begins to dissolve because both are participating in the same unfolding process. As we've said throughout this series, the living current does not separate these things into isolated compartments. Everything is connected. Everything participates. Everything influences everything else to some degree. And this understanding also changes how we think about fate. Rather than imagining a single fixed future, I prefer to imagine countless streams flowing ahead of us. Some are broad and powerful because our current choices naturally lead towards them. Others remain narrow possibilities that could grow if we begin feeding them with our attention and our actions. Every decision strengthens one stream while or while allowing another to diminish. Every habit reinforces a particular future. Every belief quietly shapes what we notice, what we ignore, and ultimately what becomes possible. Magic simply enters that ongoing process consciously. Instead of drifting through the current, we begin asking ourselves which currents we are feeding. Which future am I strengthening? Which possibilities am I allowing to wither through neglect? What kind of person am I becoming through the choices I repeatedly make? And these are magical questions because they recognize that transformation rarely happens in a single moment. It happens through countless small adjustments that gradually alter the direction of our lives. I also think this perspective encourages humility. The old image of the magician standing above nature issuing commands to the universe has never really resonated with me. I much prefer the image of a gardener. A gardener cannot force a seed to germinate. They cannot command a flower to bloom. What they can do is prepare the soil, provide water, remove weeds, protect young plants, and create conditions where growth becomes increasingly likely. Nature performs the miracle. The gardener participates in it. That, to me, is a beautiful image of magical practice. We don't dominate the living current, we cultivate our relationship with it. We learn its rhythms, we become sensitive to its movement, we work with its natural tendencies instead of struggling against them. And over time, those seemingly small acts of participation accumulate. A conversation changes a friendship changes an opportunity changes a career changes a family influences a community shapes a generation. Everything flows into everything else. And perhaps that has always been the real secret behind magic. Not that we possess unlimited power over reality, but that reality itself is already a living network of relationships, probabilities, and possibilities. And through intention, symbolism, ritual, and conscious action, we become active participants in that network. We add our own influence to the countless influences already at work, trusting that even the smallest adjustment to the current can, over time, contribute to remarkable change. The living current is always moving. It has been moving since long before any of us arrived, and it will continue long after we're gone. The question is not whether we can stop it or command it. The question is whether we can learn to move with it wisely, recognizing those moments where a gentle touch is enough to help guide the flow toward a future that is richer, more meaningful, and more deeply aligned with who we are becoming. I think that is where fate and magic finally meet, in participation and in relationship. And perhaps that is far more empowering than the fantasy of domination ever could be.